Okay, so Carl has given us all a choice of saying less or talking faster, and I've chosen to just talk faster. I'm not cutting a thing. So this session, without further ado, is about innovation in the immigrant settlement sector, why it's needed, and how to produce it. And the basic ingredients are pretty simple. They're collaboration, introspection, and organization. Now, the premise of the project is that the work of the settlement sector has commercial value. It can be sold, and in so doing, it can reduce the sector's dependence on existing financial sources. Now, what the sector or individual agencies do with the earnings is entirely up to them. Agencies can advocate, they can offer enhanced services, they can invest in stocks and bonds. I mean, the point of this is that this is a device for achieving independence. So the talk I have is built around three arguments. The first argument, as Carl mentioned, is that the whole settlement ecosystem, I like that word, is undergoing rapid change. The second is that the sector lacks a robust capacity to respond to this change and to capitalize on the opportunities that are emerging. And the third is that the solution to this problem lies in innovation, which can be accessed through the sector's own ingenuity. And I'm going to address each of these arguments in turn, starting with the changes and the challenges facing the sector. Now, when I was talking about this during the National Settlement Conference, I tried to link all this stuff, but I had more time. So here I'm just going to present a kind of a set of curated highlights, starting with number one, and the one that I think everybody focuses on immediately, is just the whole shift in economic activity, in immigration patterns, and then in demand for services, a lot of which has now moved to the West, which creates problems in the East where absorptive capacity is diminished. In the West, obviously, there's a demand for new services. Now, the patterns are new, but what's also new are some of the pathways that people take to come into the country, and as a result, the challenges they encounter. So one huge set of changes going on there. The second change that I'd probably point to is the fact that the family class is essentially flatlined, and economic immigration has pretty much assumed complete dominance. Service needs and appetites, as you heard in the previous panel, are correlated with immigration categories. So shift categories, shift needs. Three, accompanying this category shift, there's been a very significant uptick in selection criteria for permanent migrants. I think at the National Settlement Conference, CIC officials noted that some of the changes in personal attributes are correlated with changes in service needs. They also suggested that it might be correlated with a reduced need for service. I think research probably supports some of this, and I think it would be naive for anyone who's here not to recognize that improved selection can substitute for expenditure. So I think it's just part of the argument about why you need to do something. Non-permanent migration has also exploded, and that's been a huge transformation. As a consequence, service eligibility has become an extremely important issue, and when I say that, I always underline the fact that just because people can't get services doesn't mean they don't need them, want them, or that everyone else who's engaged with them isn't going to be better off if they were to receive them. 5, immigration is becoming more important in many rural and northern communities. Now, wherever this is happening, pride of place isn't occupied by the immigration ministries. It's occupied more by, and I think Don Curry mentioned yesterday, by economic development ministries and by other ministries associated with the creation of jobs. And you see it reflected in which agencies within the municipalities are especially interested in immigration, and they're the folks who are concerned about jobs. Okay. Shifting policies and shifting immigration flows, notably changing entry pathways, the new selection methods, the different destinations, repatriation of services by the federal government. All of these changes are not neutral with respect to the institutions that are involved. When you make these changes, you repattern, in a way, the institutional infrastructure that's engaged in delivering services to newcomers. So universities and colleges, employers and employer institutions, municipalities, all of those public and quasi-public institutions, many of these organizations lack the expertise and they lack the capacity to respond to the demands that they face. So where are they going to turn in order to get this assistance? Well, we hope that we're going to be able to provide an answer to that question. Okay, 7. Settlement organizations depend primarily, and in many cases, or in a lot of cases, almost entirely on government funding. And the forecast here is not especially rosy. You know, when you look at CIC spending from its peak, there's been quite a significant reduction over the last five to 6 years. Similar cutbacks can be expected on the provincial front, especially in the hard-hit provinces. Some people talk about a fiscal cliff. And I think ministries that have in recent years gotten more involved in newcomer programs are getting squeezed to focus on their core mandates. So it's not to say that you can't involve them, it's just to say that the job is just getting a little bit tougher. So expansion or even maintenance of activity at current levels, that's going to be more of a challenge unless you can find other ways to finance your existence. The final change that I want to mention concerns the structure of the settlement sector and the appearance of new technologies. So on the one hand, I think we all are aware of the kind of the growing sophistication and the growing size of many immigrant organizations, and that I think speaks to their growing capacity. On the other hand, or at the same time, what we're seeing in the settlement sector is the entry of a whole lot of new kinds of organizations that are being contracted by government to deliver services that at one time were delivered by settlement organizations. And that, I think, speaks to the sector's vulnerability. Now, technology here can be a great enabler or it can be a threat. On the one hand, it allows the sector to project its expertise into new markets. On the other hand, it allows their competitors to do the same. You know, there's that expression, if you're not in the hunt, you end up on the table, and the rewards go to those who innovate the fastest. I want to move to my second argument, which is that the settlement sector lacks the capacity to respond effectively to the changes that are taking place and to the opportunities that are emerging. Now, this is a critical failing in the sense that the status quo isn't a tenable option, and looking to governments to restore funding simply isn't on. So how do you escape this particular dilemma? What we argue in the agency, the Future Project, is that the sector has been slow to recognize its own strengths. In particular, the sector has been slow to apprehend the commercial possibilities of some of the unique skills and abilities that it possesses. Now, this has a lot to do with the sector's origins and the sector's culture. The sector thinks in terms of helping and influencing, but it thinks less frequently in terms of selling. And as a result, it also tends to view government as an enabler rather than as a client. I think what's interesting, though, is that in looking across the sector as a whole, because that's really a very, very large sector, there are lots and lots of individual examples of services and expertise being purchased by employers, by universities and colleges. Don mentioned an example of that yesterday, at least on the college front, and various non-immigration ministries, all of which raises two questions. First, what is it that's being purchased and appears to have commercial value? And second, why isn't this happening more often and more systematically? So I'm just going to start with the first question, which was a central theme of a study that we undertook a few years ago for CISA-ACSE. And the question that we tried to answer in that study was, what is it that makes settlement agencies so special and if you kind of reframe that in an economic sense, what you're saying is, what is it, where does their durable competitive advantage lie? It's an important question because that durable kind of strategic advantage is something that can't be competed away from you. And the answer to that question appears to lie in two features of how settlement organizations, settlement agencies work. Now, the first of these has to do with problem solving. Settlement agencies aren't organized like supermarkets where clients walk along the aisle filling their basket with essential services. Instead, settlement agencies assemble services on behalf of clients. And this is where their special expertise lies. They know what's in the parts bin, and they know how to put it together in order to solve problems for their clients. Other organizations, and I include government agencies in this, tend to be more specialized. They know a lot about their services, less about the services of neighboring ministries and governments, and they know a whole lot less about how to assemble these services. Now, the important thing about this skill is that this is a skill you got to learn hands-on. You can't read about it. You get to acquire it by doing it. The second area of distinction that makes settlement organizations unique is their acquired social capital. It's their ability to mediate connections between mainstream organizations on the one hand and ethnocultural communities on the other. And again, this is acquired through the work that settlement organizations do. And this is something that's valued by mainstream organizations. In a survey that we did as part of the study I referred to, we asked the heads of major organizations how much time and where they devoted the time to unfunded activities. And what we got back was that on average people were spending about 30 hours a month doing things like sitting on police boards, serving on health councils, engaging with educational institutions. All of this is work that capitalizes on their connections with ethnocultural communities. And in our paper, what this leads us to argue is that settlement organizations need to make a concerted, systematic, and sustained effort to capitalize on these core strengths and these strategic advantages when they're looking to expand their business opportunities. Now, of course, the question that this begs is, if that's the case, well, why hasn't it happened already, or why hasn't it happened more often? And the answer to that question would appear to lie in the manner in which the settlement sector is funded, which is essentially on a fee-for-service basis. Government agencies, government organizations pay settlement agencies to do, not to think. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of margin for market research, market analysis, investment in enterprise development, and so forth, which is just another way of saying that the settlement sector suffers from chronic underinvestment in innovation. Which brings me to my third and final argument, which is that the structural problems that characterize the sector and that limit its ability to innovate can be addressed through collective action and through partnership. And I'm going to start this final argument rather, by referring to a second study that we also conducted for CISA-ACSE. And this was a study that looked at promising practices in the national, I'm good, Carl, I'm going to finish in lots of time, to look, because I'm speaking fast. And I apologize to the translators. Okay, so I'm just going to refer to a second study that we did for CISA-ACSE. This one where we looked at promising practices in the national settlement sector. And going into the study, we had two main questions. The first was just a worry we had that given what we knew about underinvestment in innovation, would we find enough examples of promising practices in a variety of service areas that we wanted to look at? Our second question was, would our methodology allow us to identify the internal factors and the external conditions that make a practice excellent? And this was really important to us. this methodological question because what we wanted to know was, could we identify those factors that if we could recreate them in a different situation, we would know what we needed to do in order to be able to transfer a practice from one area of service or one location to another. And I'm happy to say that both questions were answered in the affirmative. Our methodology worked, and we found a really, really rich store of excellent projects. In fact, both Vicki and I, who did a lot of the interviews, we were amazed by the quality, I think, of many of the projects that we came across and just how clever they were. Here's what we did not find, though, which is at least as important as what we did find. What we did not find was a robust process for analyzing and transferring best practice examples. And the result of that is that innovation doesn't travel all that far in the settlement sector, or at least it doesn't travel far enough. And as a result of that, the sector as a whole doesn't benefit from the inventiveness of individual organizations. So the Agency of the Future project aims to correct this by upscaling innovation from the agency level up to the industry level, with a goal being to expand the sector's client base and to make the sector more financially independent. Now, the process that we've devised, or the process that we're proposing, has three key stages. So first of all, there's a strategic business planning stage that's led by the sector. It's backed by research and analysis. And the aim here is to identify kind of the large business lines, the promising opportunities to market services and expertise. And this could be the marketing of services and expertise to different target groups, to different institutions, or in particular locations. I mean, you have lots of options here. The second phase was, or is, a discovery phase that's built around the identification and analysis of promising practices, preferably commercial practices, in the strategic business lines that have been identified by the sector. So these practices become the basic technology that you use in order to craft how you're going to enter into new markets. And the third phase is a multi-method. Sorry, I should say that in order to support this phase, what we would do is we would conduct the same sort of analysis, documentary analysis, and interviews that we conducted in the Promising Practice Study, which was a methodology that we felt was successful. The third component of our proposal is a multi-method dissemination phase that would be used to teach interested settlement organizations how to develop and how to implement essentially promising practices. And the teaching methods that we would use would cover a range of things. They could include a summer institute where practices would be discussed as case studies. They'd be taught by combined teams of researchers and agency experts. We could also have online instructional resources. In part, we could support this through filming of the workshops that I just spoke about a moment ago. Instructional primers that could be produced for different areas of practice that would describe the key features of best practices, including some of the research that you'd need to do in order to explore market opportunities, sample questionnaires that you would use in analyzing staff capacities, in analyzing markets, and so on. The proposal as a whole envisages an annual cycle, and this is what we're calling the innovation cycle, that would over time add new business lines, new analyses of promising practices into this instructional inventory with a view to equipping agencies with the tools to do a better job in promoting their independence. Proposal also calls for the creation of some sort of institution that could kind of manage this overall process, and we're essentially agnostic on what the exact shape or nature of this institution is or would be. So here's where we stand. Am I in my last 2 minutes? Perfect, I am. We've met twice We here being sector representatives, researchers from the Pathways to Prosperity project, CIC in an observer capacity. First meeting was proof of concept. We survived that. Second meeting was with umbrella associations who came to that meeting. And what we did in order to go forward was we created a steering committee and 3 action groups. We have a strategic and business lines group that Carl referred to. That group is going to begin with a sector-wide audit to see what's actually going on, and with a particular focus on commercial opportunities. So we want to find what's actually taking place that we can build on. The same group is also going to be responsible for examining the opportunities that are available to the sector in respect of government agencies, public and quasi-public institutions. And as Carl said, we've asked John Warren from the Mars District, Discovery District, to help us think about how exactly we should approach this task. The second task group we have focuses on the innovation and partnership group, that's what it's called. And that group is responsible for describing the innovation cycle in more detail, exploring what the partnership between the settlement sector and the research organization, P2P, should look like, and finally figuring out what CIC's interest in this is, because CIC has a strategic stewardship interest in making sure that innovation is successful in the sector. The third group is the technology group, which is going to focus on the role that technology can play in identifying new clients, in serving people in a different way, and importantly, in developing new business models and new ways to deliver a value proposition. And Adnan Qayyum is going to be sharing ideas from other sectors that have been innovating more rapidly than the settlement sector. We've identified volunteers for all of these groups. People have come forward, and from the, we have volunteers to serve in all of these groups, both from the settlement sector and from the Pathways to Prosperity project. CIC is going to participate in an observer capacity. We expect to hit full stride. We'll really be rolling come the new year, and we hope to wrap up in the fall. And wrapping up means that we're going to have some sort of a credible proposal that we can take for in-depth discussions with the various stakeholder groups. Final point, this is not a closed shop. If you have an interest, you want to help drive this initiative forward, you can contact either Carl or myself, and we will direct you into one of the groups, and you can be part of the team. Thank you.